Ready? All right. Have you ever loved something so much and nobody else really cares about it?
Yes.
That was me with the universe of Wars. Back in 2004, when I was in high school, the company called Decipher, who made the Star Wars collectible card game, they had lost the license to that game, and it was my favorite game. I played it all the time growing up. But then Wizards of the Coast, as they do, got the license to it instead. But people loved the rules to that game, because it had really unique rules. Unlike most card games where, like Magic the Gathering, we have to beat down people's life points, your deck itself was the whole thing. You basically, when you hurt your opponent, you hurt their deck. And so it was very elegant. Everything in there was all combined into one nice little package. And so they decided, hey, people like the rules, let's make our own universe. So they got one of my all-time favorite writers, Michael A. Stackpole, who wrote a lot of Star Wars books that I adore, as well as John Howe, who did a lot of the art for the Lord of the Rings movies. They got them together along with a bunch of other writers and artists. They pooled their ideas and they came up with a new universe, which they called Wars, which is going to be the first mistake here, because unfortunately we are going to have to talk about a few things that are mistakes, but we're also going to get to talk about how things have survived and come back. So, yeah, they decided to call the game Wars. Originally they were going to call it the Moomin Rift Wars. And unfortunately there was a game called Rifts, and they were like, that actually isn't going to fly. Please change your name immediately. And so Decipher decided to just cut it down to Wars. And as you can probably guess, if you Google Wars, a lot of other things come up that aren't this card game. But they were hoping to, get the idea of Star Wars in there. They were hoping that they would communicate to people this is similar to Star Wars. This is something that if you like Star Wars, you'll like this, because it's just wars. But that didn't communicate enough. But even so, when the game came out, it actually did incredibly well. It came out at Gen Con. It was a huge premiere. It was the biggest premiere Decipher had ever had. And things looked like they were going to be going great. Spoilers for the future of this story, there's only 2 sets that were released for this card game. So, not exactly great. But it started there. You see, there was another problem going on here. So, Decipher had started with this. There were some issues. But even so, they had a lot of loyal fans. They had a lot of loyal players. And I was one of them. I remember when I used to be subscribed to this gaming magazine called Scry. It's long out of print and out of business, as are a lot of magazines, because we live in the year 2024. But they put this postcard in there, and the postcard had all of this beautiful concept art, and it was just Wars is coming soon, and I was like, I'm in. This looks great. I've got no idea what's going on, but I'm ready. And then they started releasing short stories, and Michael A. Stackpole wrote some of them. Some were written by other authors, and every week I kind of tuned in, and I was so ready for them to drop the next story and learn more about this universe and these characters and everything. And little did I know that behind the scenes of all of this, at the wonderful company of Decipher Inc., there was sadly an embezzlement situation going on. Unfortunately, someone at the company, who was the guy who was in charge of their books, stole their money. And he spent it all. It wasn't something where they could get it back. He spent it on cruises and expensive golf courses and that sort of thing. So they were just out a lot of money, and they had to decide what they were going to do next. And unfortunately, that meant that they had to make some big cuts. And they had done a lot of things like the Star Wars card game or the Lord of the Rings card game, or what they were doing where they were just paying people to license images from movies to put on cards. So, you'd have a card with Aragorn on it, or Han Solo. But of course, for this game, you can't do that, and you probably can't see it very well all the way from up here, but each card has individual artwork on it, which a lot of games do. But if you're going to cut down your game, if you're going to go, okay, I need to cut costs at my company, you're going to have to cut the game that costs the most money to make. And so they put it on hiatus after only 2 sets. And they were hoping that things would turn around and they would be able to get the game back going. But unfortunately, that just didn't happen. So it looked like everything was gonna be done for a while, but the thing was that people hadn't forgotten about this universe. And of course, because of the fact I'm up here, you can kind of guess that one of those people might be me, possibly. So years passed, and we get to around 2009, 2010. Wow, something's going on. Yeah, they're just excited that Wars is coming back. They just heard it's 2009. They're like, yes! GrailQuest Books! GrailQuest Books is going to be making Wars? Oh my god! Yeah, see? They're going nuts!
That's what's happening in that panel room over there too, I think. I'm pretty sure. Whole con is hearing it.
Whole con is hearing it, yeah. Yeah, so a company called GrailQuest Books out of Bangor, Maine, they decided they were going to make some Wars fiction. And they did. This one is the very first story that they released, and it's an illustrated novella by my good pal, Nathan P. Butler. Yeah! Nathan P. Butler, yeah! He's a writer for Star Wars comics, and he's like a fantastic guy. But they had a real big ambitions with this. They commissioned brand new artwork just for this book. And their whole plan was that they were going to build up to a big event within the universe. Within the whole setting of Wars.
You have your very own laugh track.
I know, it's wonderful. Yeah. Within the universe of Wars, there are 5 big factions. There's 3 of them that are humans, and there's 2 of them that are aliens. You have people from Earth who are called, and you guys are not going to believe what the people from Earth are called, Earthers. There's people from Mars, and you're not going to guess what they're called, Gonjan. And then there's people who are kind of spread out on the Outer Rim who are called Mavericks. And each of them has a very different society. Obviously, the people on Earth, wow, big Earther fans. Earth has become a corporatocracy. Everything is run by a corporation, everything is owned by a corporation, and they believe that they own Mars, or Gongan. The planet Gongan has decided that they don't want to be owned entirely by corporations. They would rather be, 1, a communist society, and B, have their entire society run by a giant artificial intelligence program. And so things start kind of heating up between them. Then on the Outer Rim, you have the Mavericks, who are kind of spread out, and they just don't want to be ruled by anybody. They don't want corporate overlords, they don't want an AI managing them. They want to do their own thing. Now, later on in the universe, a giant tear opens up in the fabric of space and time, and 2 alien races come through, but we're going to come back to that later. For now, we just need to know that humanity's kind of fractured into 3 groups. And with Earth and Mars in such big opposition to each other, people love that opposition. They kind of start getting ready to go to war with each other. And that's where they decided to zone in with this fiction. Josh Radke and Cassandra Radke, who ran GrailQuest Books, they thought this is like an amazing part of the history of this universe that no one's bothered exploring, so let's go there. So the Battle of Phobos series started, and the first stories are built in the build-up to it. You have characters who are kind of starting to realize that things are starting to go wrong. Things are starting to escalate. Things are starting to build up to a point where no one's going to be able to go back from having this giant interstellar war. And things started out looking pretty good, but the release model was a little bit funky. See, as you can see, this is one novella. This is the third novella that was released, which is the Mavericks novella, also illustrated. But then you have this volume right here, which is War's Preludes, the first collection that they released, and this has 3 novellas in it. And that's a little bit confusing to explain to people, because the first book is kind of 3 books. Each one has a different perspective. 3 different views on the same events that are going on through the solar system. And it's very cool. You get to see how these different groups are thinking, how they're falling apart from each other, how things are both progressing and also just kind of like crumbling. People love crumbling. But it's a lot easier to market one novel than say that this is a book of kind of like 3 short novels together. So they only ever released 2 of the 3 first ones as individual ones, and after that, they only released them as these collections of 3. And it was supposed to be a trilogy of trilogies. So this one has 3, this one has 3, and this is where I got my first publishing job, actually. I started working for GrailQuest Books, doing work on this book. I was doing setting advising because I was a ridiculous nerd for this universe and doing a lot of proofreading. And so I got my first gigs with this. It was very wonderful getting to work on this universe that I cared so much about, but it was also very sad because I watched things fall apart for a second time. Unfortunately, there were a lot of creative differences behind the scenes, and the 3rd volume never came out. For now. So, after a while, it looked like Wars was dead for a second time. We had had the card game, they had tried to build it up, it had started, it had failed. We had had this second iteration of these novellas that were trying to do an amazing epic prequel story, and they had also failed. And it looked like that was kind of gonna be it. I had kind of moved on with my writing career at that point. And in fact, at that point, I had been brought in because they had to drop a novella by one of the writers for the 3rd volume because they were having such problems creatively that they brought me in to write a replacement novella at the last minute, and I was supposed to write it in a huge rush so it could come out like within a month, and I just scrambled and I wrote it, and I was like, yes, I'm gonna get this publishing job on it, and then the book just never came out after I wrote it in a big hurry. So, yeah, like I said, I moved on, and then I get an email one day from Josh Radke, my old boss, because I was no longer working for GrailQuest Books, and he's like, hey, I see that you started your own publishing house, Arcbeatle Press. You guys have been doing pretty good. I would like to recommend you to Decipher to take over the Wars license. And you cannot imagine how quickly I replied to that email as soon as I saw it. So that's when I come into the story. And once again, we're going to roll things back a little bit here, because now I get to talk about myself, which is just like always the best part of any panel. First, you have to like build history of like other people, and then you're like, yes, me now, the amazing person sitting in front of you. I'm not actually that conceited, but you know what I mean. I was very happy to get this. As I said, I had been a fan right from the start. I read all the original stories, but things really started taking off again when I was in college. I had been playing a lot of trading card games, and they were very expensive. I don't know if any of you have ever played like Magic the Gathering or... No? Yeah, okay. Well, let me just tell you their money sinks. I love playing them, but the cards are expensive and you just have to keep buying them because the game keeps changing. People love spending money on them though, as you can tell. And so I was like, all right, wait a second. How cheap is that game I used to love back in the day, Wars? And I Googled it, and you could get like boxes of the cards for just like a few bucks. And I was like, okay, here's a plan. I bought the boxes. I went around my campus and I burned CDs, because this is back in the day when everyone had a CD drive on their laptop. And I burned all the stories onto the CD. And I would like put a deck with the CD and I'd hand them out to people like, hey, you want to try this card game for free? And it was worth like just spending a handful of bucks to do this. And I made a bunch of friends that way. Actually, my best friend to the current day, Joe Smiley, shout out to Joe if you're watching this out there. I met because we started out this way, me just handing out decks to people and being like, hey, let's play together. And we started this big club on my college campus. Some of the writers from the Grail Quest book series started coming by and visiting us. That's how I started getting in touch with them. That's how I started getting work with them. And we also played the role-playing game a lot. Every weekend we'd get together and we started telling stories. And we started building up these characters and ideas together that we just thought were really fantastic. And it started just getting me thinking a lot. Like, I had written like a little bit of fan fiction for it back in the day. None of it has survived, which is probably for the best, because I was definitely not as good of a writer when I was a teenager as I am now. But the stories we started telling then were just a lot more complex, a lot more interesting. And we started thinking about the setting in a way I'm not sure a lot of people had thought of before, because we weren't just interested in the wars part of it. We were really interested in just all the weird nooks and crannies, because you start reading the stories, you start reading the role-playing book, you start reading the text on the cards, you realize there's so much thought put into every part of this. It's kind of amazing the level of detail that was done for a game that only lasted 2 sets for just a couple months, really, between 2004 and 2005. And there was a lot of room for us to play around. So when I got the chance to tell stories myself, I mean, I was ready. So this right here is WARSONG, the Battle of Phobos Preludes. And you might be saying, hey, that sounds an awful lot like this book, Wars, the Battle of Phobos Preludes. And that's because very quickly, after we started working with Decipher, we had one conversation that was really necessary, which is, no one can Google wars. And they were like, yes, we know. And I was like, all right. We brainstormed a ton of ideas for new names. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, and most of them weren't very good. We had, I think one was War Saga, but eventually we settled on WARSONG. Something that people can search on the internet and that you can find if you start looking up these stories. So this book is basically the same thing as the first one, except we allowed the authors another chance to kind of revise their work. So it's improved over the first one, and I added a short story in the back because I had now read all of the novellas that were completed, and I was able to put a little linking material that made the whole book series feel a lot more complete. So things were looking up, and we had started a program of marketing the books by releasing free short stories to go along with them, which was very neat. We put out like Easter specials and Halloween specials, and you can still read them for free on the internet. They're all out there. And so this was part of our marketing plan. And we'd like signed with Decipher, we were doing this, and then something happened, which was, I don't know if you guys heard about this. There was this thing a couple of years back that started called the global pandemic.
What?
Yeah, I don't know if you heard about that.
No.
Yeah. So a few things happened during all that, which we don't really need to get into, but we kind of had a lot of plans for those stories. And without getting into all the nitty-gritty, some things happened that made all of those stories, some of them, in pretty poor taste to release. And we were like, oh, so we have this whole plan about marketing, and now we can't use it unless we want to look like awful. What are we going to do? And they're like, okay, due to world events, a lot of these stories are going to look awful because of like just the wars element. And I'm like, this setting is called Wars. We mean, we're named it WARSONG, but how are we going to do a thing to promote this whole series, to get people to care about it for a setting called Wars when we can't feature a war in this promotional material. And we started talking, me and the other people at Arcbeatle Press, including my good friend Clara O'Hara, and we came up with this wild idea, which is, we're kind of nearing the end of the history here. Academy 27. This is a series of short stories that all tells about the adventures of a group of high school students on Guanjin. And these students, well, they're in the lead-up to these stories. In fact, the characters in this one show up in the third and final volume of the Battle of Phobos series and are some of the youngest recruits who are forced to fight in the battle. And so we started thinking, okay, we all have a love of like slice of life anime. We love things like Haruhi Suzumiya or Clannad or manhwa like My Life as an Internet Novel. And so we're like, okay, we can put these characters, take them out of the idea of there being a war, but put the tension in there. Because these kids, they're trying to grow up, they're trying to, get girlfriends and boyfriends, they're trying to have adventures, get through class. But there's also this looming threat that the adults around them are starting to push them to be ready for this conflict that they don't have a choice whether or not they're going to be a part of. And it's led to a series that was really compelling and one of the most popular things Arcbeatle Press did in years. And it's just very unexpected. And that's kind of a lot of what Wars has been. Wars is a universe of taking chances and doing unexpected things. For our 10th anniversary, the characters from both Wars and Academy 27 ended up featuring in our 10th anniversary novel, which was a three-way crossover between the characters of Wars, the characters of 90s Doctor Who in the Quedge the series, and our own series, 10,000 Dawns. And it went over amazingly well. And now you can now say things like canonical Doctor Who character Jae Sang-mi, which is very fun. But that's getting away from the main point here, which is just that Wars has meant a lot to me over the years. It's brought me a lot of my best friends. It's brought me amazing stories, and I really wanted to bring those stories to other people because I care a lot about it. And it's a universe that's always been the underdog. It has managed to get down and get kicked over and over, but it wouldn't be here if people just didn't really, really care about it. It doesn't have the biggest fan base in the world, but the people that there are, they're gonna know what it is. And hopefully if you're listening to it and watching it now, you know a bit about what it is. So I'd like to open it up to questions now, if any of you have any. Yes!
I have a question. How did you, for And Today You, how did you decide to cross over the three properties? And double barrel question here.
Yeah.
But how did you get the rights to the Doctor Who story as well?
Yeah, okay. So I had been thinking about the 10th anniversary of our company for quite a while because I knew it was coming up and I was like, I know we have to do something for it. And I didn't want it to be something like kind of haphazard. We'd done an anniversary special for our series 10,000 Dawns that was a short story that I didn't get the amount of time I wanted to put into in it. And it was good enough, like people liked it, but I wasn't satisfied with it. It didn't do anything special. Like that story was just kind of like a lot of characters writing birthday messages for another character. And it was very fun to get to see all these people, but nothing happened in it that you remember or like really want to tell your friends about. So I started thinking what actually would be special. And I started thinking about what characters would be interesting to see together. And I started realizing that it would be really compelling to bring a certain group of characters together from this. If you have the character Chris Quedge, He's a character from 90s Doctor Who, and he's well known for big Chris Quetch fans.
He's very well known. Yeah. Woo.
He's he's very well known for having a lot of adventures with the Seventh Doctor, where he ends up getting like quite a bit of like trauma and self-loathing over the course of it, and dealing with a lot of that. He shows up in a lot of other like licensed Doctor Who spin-off materials, and there's been just a lot of very interesting stuff done with him and his mental health. The main character from the Wars stories who appear in this, Sangmi, she also deals a lot with her mental health. Sangmi very canonically has a futuristic implant in her that releases her depression medication into her body without her needing to take any pills. But she's, still struggling with this. And I started thinking about this because we had been publishing Quetch stories. We'd really just gotten that off the ground fairly recently. My friend Hunter O'Connell was the one running Quetch the series, and he had gone through several publishers with the book, and none of them could get it over the line. There'd been all this work done, and it was like every time he was getting there, things just collapsed right at the last moment. So, and I swear this is all gonna link up, but so I started working with him, but I was like, I don't know if I want to do this because it's going to be so much work. I can see why other people struggle to get Quetch the series out. And I'm like, all right, Hunter decides to call me late at night one night, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take this call. I'm probably going to turn Hunter down about this. I'm not sold. And then Hunter just starts telling me a story of how when he was at his very lowest point in his life with his own depression, he had read a cheap paperback of a novel with Chris Quetch in it, and it was something that had he just reread it and it kept him from going over that line. Mm-hmm. And I related to that a lot because there's a lot of stories that have meant a lot to me that I could say that about, both with Doctor Who and with how just my friendships and the stories I was telling in college with Wars kept me going when I was at my lowest point. And when I heard Hunter tell me this, I told him immediately, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this story out for you. And we did. We got it out. And so when it was time for our 10th anniversary, I realized, that is the story of our company. That is the story of why people care about Arcbeatle Press, why people care about the stories we're telling. Because we're not just telling stories that are, we got a license to a Doctor Who character and we're going to churn stuff out. We got a license to a Doctor Who character because we care about that character. We love that character. We're releasing war stories because I love this universe and it's mattered to me. And that's what this novel really at its heart is about. Because I wanted to put these characters together who have a lot in common. When you see them together on the page, you'd think that they could have been written for each other. But the other thing that links them together is that these characters are the things that mattered to us, the people who made Arcbeatle Press. And getting them together like that just meant a lot to us, and it ended up being a really great story to boot. So that was a very long-winded way of answering your question, but
thank you. I think that's a beautiful answer. That's excellent.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming and listening to me talk about this. This really is something that's meant a lot to me. The 20th anniversary of Wars and Warsong is this year, this fall, and we have a very special project that is coming out then. It's going to be called Warsong, Steel Changelings. We've got a lot of amazing writers who are working on it right now, including some people who have worked on some pretty cool things, and I hope that you'll check us out again this fall and check a look at that, because it's going to be something special. and I hope it will be something that people notice even outside of the usual folks who care about this. So, till then, just keep enjoying the things that you love.